Okay, let's get started. So first things first, I start by measuring 120 grams of active starter into my bowl. Next, I tare my scale to 0 and I add 680 grams of water. I'm using regular tap water. I use the whisk to mix my water and my starter, and I stir until my starter is fully dissolved. Next, I tare my scale back to 0 and I add 850 grams of all-purpose or regular bread flour. Next, I add 150 grams of a sturdier flour, either whole wheat, rye, spelt, oat. I get to a total of 1,000 grams of flour. Next, I add 20 grams of salt. I just pour it in. I tared my scale back to 0 again and watch for 20 grams. Now I use a spoon to blend my flour and salt on top of my liquid. And once it's blended, I begin stirring the dough with my spoon. I keep stirring with the spoon until the dough's really started to come together, and then I finish it with my hands. Hi everyone! So I can see that there's a few of you here. It's almost 7 o'clock, so we'll get started. If you've got any questions today, make sure you get them uploaded. I am sitting at the rugby field. My daughter is practicing for rugby every Monday now for the rest of the summer. So it looks like I'll be doing these lives from the field. The sun is actually blazing in the front of the truck on my face. So I hope you don't mind, but I've got my sunglasses on. I think you can still kind of see my eyes though. So if you're new here and you don't know who I am, my name is Sarah. I started Sourdough for Beginners. I teach sourdough, and I do these live Q&As every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Here in the StarCam app, you have the ability to upload your questions directly to me. So you can record a video and show me your starter, or show me your bread, show me your mix, or ask your question. I'll be able to actually play your video. We can pause it. I can answer in real time. You can also submit questions via text message. We had been working on getting a guest host this week, a man named Bill Burbage, who makes some amazing bread in our group, but we haven't quite got it worked out yet. So hopefully Bill will be here next week, or perhaps Rick might come check in a little bit here and we might be able to add him. But for now, we're just going to do this the same way we always do. So if you're here, get your questions uploaded. I don't see any yet, but I'll just keep teaching until we get some. So what kind of questions could you ask? If you are finding that your dough is too sticky, or too thick, or isn't stretching and folding very well, or is not holding its shape when you're going to score, if you need some scoring help, if you want to understand the best way to bake your bread, what temperature, what style, these are all great questions to ask. And this is your opportunity to sort of figure those things out. So Sourdough for Beginners started out as a group on Facebook. I taught myself how to make sourdough a long time ago. It was a health thing for my family. We decided we didn't want to eat any more bread from the grocery store if we could find a way to make it happen. At the time, I was on a really extreme budget, so I kind of like had to make it work. There was a point where I was actually choosing between being able to buy flour or bread. So when I took that leap and bought the flour, the bread had to work, right? So we ended up eating some very dense loaves for quite some time. But while I was learning, I found that there was just a ton of conflicting information out there, and that there were also some techniques that were a little bit more advanced than seemed really great, or seemed really really necessary. And so I simplified the process down as much as I could. And then I started to share my starter with people. And when they would get my starter, then they would start texting me and asking me, how do I make this sourdough? So I would be sitting there texting it to them. And then I decided, you know what, why don't I just start a Facebook group and I'll post sort of the answers. How do you mix up your dough? How do you make your dough work? How do you bake? And then whenever someone gets my starter or asks me questions about sourdough, I can just say, check out the group and it's all there for you. Well, the group went crazy. I think we're approaching 800,000 group members now. So since that time, we've started the Sourdough for Beginners Facebook page, which is linked to the group. It's where the group is a forum, so anyone can go into the group and post whatever they want and get sort of feedback from other group members. The page, on the other hand, I'm the only person who can post. Well, Rick, my partner, also can as well, but just the two of us can post. And so we're able to curate what we're posting on that page to what we think beginners might want to find. So there's lots of tutorials, there's information on tools that you might want to have, everything else. Oh, I see a question here from Chef Julian. So he says, hey, friend. Hi, Julian. So Julian is a chef in BC. He and I went to high school together, and oh my gosh, he makes the most amazing pastas. He's actually been on StarCam, done some how-to on cooking. So if you have the app, well, if you're here and you're watching, then you do have the app. After this live, go to the search function, find Chef Julian and follow his profile and send him a notification that you can say request a star chat. And then next time he logs in, he'll see how many people have requested a star chat. And then Julian, maybe you can go on and start doing some lives again, teaching us how to make some yummy food. So let's see what we got here. Why doesn't my bread get an ear? That's a great question. So the only way that you're going to get an ear on your bread is if it's perfectly proofed. So I actually have a little reel sitting in my phone to post probably today or tomorrow. And it says, what's the secret to sourdough scoring? And the answer is to perfect bulk proofing. So if your bread is overproofed, it won't hold its shape during the initial stages of baking, and it won't spring, and then it won't get an ear, right? So what is an ear? An ear is the part, so we functionally score our dough. So right before the dough goes into the oven, we cut a score line, because what needs to happen in the oven is in a high heat environment, the dough goes in. There's all kinds of air inside of that dough. You've trapped it in during pre-shaping and shaping. And what happens is the air inside the dough builds pressure in the heat and then eventually pops and springs. And then where you've cut that score line, it develops an ear. If your dough is overproofed, if there's too much air in there, if your dough's become too sticky and isn't holding its shape, then when it tries to spring, that score line may have fused, and so you're not going to get that pop. So TS Chili, I think the best way for you to get an ear is to go back and review the bulk proofing success video. So on YouTube, search at Sourdough for Beginners, or in my profile here on StarCam, I've got all of my links in there, the most popular tutorials. The bulk proofing success tutorial is by far the most important tutorial that any sourdough beginner could need. If you perfect your proofing, if you're getting your dough to the point where it's not underproofed and it's not overproofed, then you're going to see that ear start to come. We do suggest often that beginners, until they master the essential processes, skip cold proofing. If you've already overproofed during the bulk proofing phase, then cold proofing is just going to magnify this issue, right? Bulk proofing should take somewhere between 4 and 8 hours. In extreme cases, it might take less or more. Sometimes it can take 10 or 12 hours, but we absolutely do not recommend proofing on the counter overnight, especially for your first few loaves, because that's when we most often see dough becoming overproofed. And if you're not getting an ear, the most likely issue is that your dough is overproofed. So this says, Castlebeck, so happy to have found your site. I'm glad you're here too. I'm really glad you're here. I really love teaching. Like I said, if you were watching at the beginning, I fell into this by accident. I taught myself. I found it very difficult to learn. I found that there was a lot of conflicting information. I also found that there were some advanced processes out there that were more than a beginner needed to focus on at first. And so I developed something called the essential processes. We teach them on YouTube. I've got an ebook. It's 34 pages. It covers them all. We're just trying to simplify everything. So whenever someone comes on and says, I love to follow your site and I appreciate everything, it just motivates me more because I think it's fun and I really enjoy it. Let's see what we've got here. Hildy. Okay, so I'm going to play Hildy's video. Hildy has been following for quite some time, and she talks to me lots on Messenger. So that's another thing. If you're following the @Sourdough for Beginners page, you can message me, and I'll help you try and troubleshoot your dough. Sometimes it takes me a few hours to get back to you. I get lots of messages, but I'm absolutely happy to help. So any questions, always ask. And of course, here is a great one. So let's see what Hildy has to say.
Hey, Sarah. It's Hildy. We've been communicating today about my starter, and it is on the counter. It's almost doubled. Should I feed it again and then put it in the fridge, or as soon as it is doubled, at that point, should I put it in the fridge right away without feeding until I'm ready to use it? I'm not sure, but just want to make sure that I'm doing this right. As you know, I've flubbed a lot so far.
All right, so I knew this question was coming from Hildy. So Hildy bought a dehydrated starter and started activating it a few days ago. So if you're building a starter from scratch, there's sort of like a 7 to 10 day period where certain things need to happen. If you buy a dehydrated starter, it's considered an activated starter, and all that needs to happen is for you to get it to feed it enough until it starts doubling. So Hildy took her dehydrated starter, followed the directions, and it started doubling today. Hildy is planning to do her first bake Friday or Saturday. So I told her she's got a couple of options. This is an active starter, right? A dehydrated starter is considered an active starter. When you activate your own starter, when you make your own starter from scratch, we recommend that you feed it lots even after it starts doubling. So once a day to continue to build strength. Whereas Hildy's is already pretty strong. So Hildy, we never really recommend that you feed your starter more than once every 24 hours or so, and it doesn't have to be super rigid. The only time we would ever recommend either peak to peak feedings, which is as soon as it peaks, discard it and feed it again, or feeding twice a day every 12 hours, is if you're trying to build strength. In your case, you're not trying to do that. So you've got a couple of options. If you want to try and build some strength, then just leave it sitting on the counter. It's going to rise and then it's going to fall. That's all normal. These are all good things. And just feed it once a day, right? And the day before you're going to bake, I'm hoping that you're going to mix your dough in the morning, get through your stretch and folds, get your dough into your bulk proofing container, and make sure you're able to keep an eye on it while it's bulk proofing and watch for it to get to that double, right? So what I always suggest is that you feed your starter before bed and mix early in the morning. So you can use your starter at or after peak. The longer past peak you go, the more sour flavor. Hildy is very interested in not having a sour flavor in her sourdough, so she's feeding on a 1 to 5 to 5 ratio, which means that she has discarded back down to 20 grams of starter and is feeding 100 grams each of flour and water. So Hildy, if your starter's sitting at peak right now, I would just stick it in the fridge. And I would take it out. If you're going to bake Friday morning, take it out Thursday night as close to bedtime as possible. Discard it, feed it, leave it sitting on the counter, bake with it first thing in the morning. If you really want to ensure that you're not going to have any sour flavor at all, get up early Friday morning, take your starter out of the fridge, discard it, feed it, wait for it to double. And as soon as it's doubled, then begin mixing your bread. It's going to put you a little bit later at the point when you're baking your first loaf, but that is going to ensure that you don't get that sour flavor that you want.
Hey, I was just thinking we should do maybe a tutorial soon. Again, like just a restart. Let's make a new starter from scratch. Like maybe we could talk about that because there's probably some people in here that don't even have a starter going yet.
Yeah. Okay. So on YouTube, there is a full day-by-day starter tutorial. Um, so at Sourdough for Beginners on YouTube. It's also in my profile here on StarCam. There's a whole bunch of links. The day-by-day starter tutorial takes you every single day. So day one, do this, right? Day two, do this. Day three, look what it's doing. And it sort of shows you what's going to happen with your starter. It talks all about, what the smells are going to be, how it's going to look, and how you're going to recognize when it's ready to go. So we do have a tutorial like that. Um, and maybe we will build another one again, but that tutorial does exist. Or the other option is you can get a gifted starter. So if you know someone who's got starter and wants to share some with you, it's pretty easy to share your starter, so that's probably the best way to go. Or you can buy a dehydrated starter. So in my Etsy shop and on sourdoughforbeginners.com, you can buy my starter mama in dehydrated form, and then once you get it, you rehydrate it, and it's considered an active starter. Probably ends up taking about the same amount of time as creating your own starter. By the time it gets shipped to you, it takes, anywhere between 3 and 8 days to arrive at your door, and then it takes 3 to 4 days to activate. So it's probably about the same amount of time, but presumably it's a stronger, more established starter than you could make on your own. So there's several options that you could do in regards to getting a starter. Oh,
I was just gonna say, I think we found a couple times that if the Dutch oven isn't quite hot enough, um, sometimes it needs that 15 minutes more before we drop our dough in because I've seen them not get great spring if we didn't have the right temperature inside.
yeah. Yeah, that's true. If so, one of the first questions that came in on this event was someone saying, "Why isn't my dough getting an ear?" And I said, 95% the answer is that your dough is overproofed. But high heat is very important for sourdough. Oven spring comes from the pressure that's built within the dough. You need high heat for it. High heat is considered around 450 degrees Fahrenheit. So some people will actually preheat their Dutch oven at 500 degrees and then turn it down. Some people even bake at 500 degrees, but my oven only goes to 450, and I do not think that it holds that temperature. Rick and I were using a temperature gun and measuring it, and it was coming in at like 410, 405. So making sure that that oven is really hot, preheating your Dutch oven. These things are going to contribute to oven spring. If your dough is only slightly overproofed, there's a few things that you can do to try to encourage it to come out successfully anyway. So one is to make sure that your Dutch oven and your oven are very hot to try and encourage that spring to happen fast before your score line fuses. Another thing is what's called a hot score. So you can score your dough, put it in the oven, wait somewhere between 8 and 10 minutes, pull your bread out. And if it looks like that score is fusing, right? So if the score is not shaped like an L and open like this, if it looks like the score is getting smooth and fusing, you can cut it again. And that's going to give your dough a chance to possibly spring, right? So, but definitely that's some experimenting that we've been doing over the last month or so. I've been playing around with things that we see on social media. So we've been sort of testing out theories that are out there so that when people ask, hey, I've seen it this way, does that work? And what we do know is that there's several different ways to do basically everything with sourdough, and all of them work. It's just a matter of finding what works for you. So we've been playing with oven temperature. We've been playing with sealing up our dough during stretching and folding, and bulk proofing to retain all of the moisture that's in it. Bill Burbage taught us that. We've been playing with adjusting all sorts of little things just to see how it comes out. So that's an interesting one. And so it looks like questions are piling up. That's awesome. There's a bunch of you in here. Don't worry, I'm going to get to all your questions. There's looks like I'm about to play one. There's 7 or 8 there, so keep sending them. When it comes time, I'll eventually let you know once we're going to finish up, but keep sending your questions. This is really great and really fun. And I hope that while you're waiting for your question to be answered, you're learning something as you go. So let's see here. Jane. Jane says, not sure what I'm doing wrong. I've tried about 5 times. My dough seems wet after bulk proofing. Should I use less water or is it overproofed? I use all purpose and whole wheat. Help, Jane. Okay, Jane, we could definitely help you. So it could be that it's a high hydration recipe. So without knowing what your recipe is, I can only guess, but I can give you a couple of good tips to try. Try as a beginner to keep your hydration percentage between 68 and 70%. So the way that hydration percentage is calculated is against flour. So if you're using 1,000 grams of flour, 68% is 680 grams of water, right? If you're using 1,000 grams of flour, 700 grams of water is 70%. So if your recipe that you're using is any more than that, if it's 750 grams, then it's a higher hydration recipe and they're harder to manage. We recommend that beginners start with a lower hydration and then work their way up. So on the YouTube channel, the first video you'll see is the beginner bread recipe. The beginner bread recipe is 120 grams of starter, 680 grams of water, 1,000 grams of flour, and 20 grams of salt. It makes 2 loaves, and it's considered low hydration. Then our level 2 hydration increases the starter to 200 grams and the water to 700 grams. So not a huge difference, but that increase in the starter contributes to the hydration, and getting up to 70% increases it. So if you're working with a very high hydration recipe, that could be part of the issue that you're having. If it seems very wet after bulk proofing, it could be that it's overproofing. So on the YouTube channel, if you click videos and scroll, it's a little bit down there, but it's called Here's Why You Should Watch Your Dough During Bulk Proofing. And I actually hold the container in my hand and show you how when the dough went into the container, in the middle of the container, it was at this height, say, right? But over here in the corner, it was only this tall. It was all lumpy and bumpy. It might not have been touching over here. So I've taken a marker and I've done this sort of squiggly line and marked the height of the dough, right? And you hear all the time, if you're going to, when you bulk proof your bread, let it double, right? But what is double? It's like so hard to figure out. And what most people don't realize is that sourdough spreads rather than rises. So if you've made yeast bread before, you put a ball of yeast bread in a bowl and it expands like a ball. It keeps its ball shape and just turns into a bigger ball. Sourdough does not do that. It spreads. It fills in all of the little crevices. So 3 to 4 hours after you start bulk proofing with your dough in a nice snug bulk proofing container, any container that fits the dough fairly snugly and has enough room for it to double in it is great. You want it to touch the edges of the dough. So somewhere between 6 and 8 cups, clear, straight-sided, so you can see what the dough is doing, right? You need to take into account the fact that it may not be double here in the center, right, at the highest point where the dough was, but over here, it may have quadrupled. So you're still estimating what doubled is, but these containers make it easier, right? We recommend that if you're going to cold proof, you only grow your dough to 75%. If you're going to bake the same day, you let it double. But Jane, what I would suggest is the first thing you can try is shorten your bulk proofing time an hour and see if it's less sticky and more manageable at that point. Then the last issue is this, right? So 1, it could be high hydration. 2, it could be overproofed, right? So these are 2 things that you can make an adjustment. The last thing is this: sourdough is sticky. It's supposed to be sticky. That's why we stretch and fold instead of kneading. You know, if we tried to knead sourdough, it would stick to everything. It is supposed to be sticky. Pre-shaping helps with this. So again, same thing. There's a video that you can find fairly easily on my YouTube channel or in my profile here on StarCam. It's pre-shaping video. It's like a minute long, and it shows you how to take this very sticky dough and use no flour, no water, just your hand and a bench scraper, and gather this dough together. Start forcing it into a ball shape And you're doing two things. One is that you're trapping all of the air that happened during bulk proofing into the dough. You're bringing the dough around itself and creating a ball shape, trapping that air in, which is going to contribute to your oven spring. But also, as you pre-shape, it takes a ton of the stickiness away. So lots of videos I've made where I'm like, see how sticky it is? Like when you take it first out of the bulk proofing container, you touch it with your fingers, it sticks to your hand. But by the time you're done pre-shaping it, you can touch it and it won't stick to anything. So Jane, for you, it's one of those three things. So I would say try adjusting all of those things, and I think you're going to get it. What's Julian saying? How do I start a brand new sourdough starter? So Julian, go on the YouTube channel, go to playlists. There's a starter playlist. The first video is called Full Day by Day Starter Tutorial. So everything you need is there, but it's pretty simple. If you've got a scale, grab a jar that's about 750 mils. So I just use like a deli container, like when you go to the deli and you buy those salads, the large one with a nice tight fitting lid. And put 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water in the jar, mix it, leave it for 24 hours. On day 2, discard half. So now you're going to have 50 grams left in there. Add 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water, stir it up. Day 3 and onward, discard back to 50 grams. So take basically 100 out and feed it 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. Repeat that every day until it doubles. Right? So one day, oh, that's the other thing. Around day 3 to 5, it's common to see your starter double. That's called a false rise. It's not quite ready yet. It should go dormant again after that. Somewhere around days 7 to 10, this starter will start to double. Feed it, do the same thing, discard and feed for a couple more days. If it doubles consistently after every feed, you're good to go. You're ready to bake. You can check out the beginner bread recipe. Once it's doubled, we do recommend feeding it on the counter for a couple of weeks to continue to build strength, and then you can start storing it in the fridge. And the one last thing I'll say is that during that initial 7 to 10 days before it started doubling consistently, I know it sucks, but you have to throw that discard away. It's not a stable compound yet. So you're going to start to see discard recipes, cookies and pizza doughs and everything else out there. Just resist the urge to save that discard just until the starter is activated. Once activated, use it. If you don't have a scale, do everything that I just said, except use a half a cup of flour and a quarter cup of water, right? And then on day 2, discard half of that, feed it half a cup of flour and a quarter cup of water. Day 3 and onward, discard back to about a quarter cup of starter and feed it half a cup of flour and a quarter cup of water. By weight volume, water weighs about twice. Water and starter both weigh about twice as much as flour, and we just want to feed equal amounts. So I hope that helps you. And Julian, if you want, just message me. I'll send you everything. Oh, and by the way, Julian, if you really want, I can just send you some of my dehydrated starter, and you can just reactivate it. So let's see what T.S. Tilly says. So I usually proof for 4 hours. Maybe I just need less time in my environment. My last dough had 1 bubble, so that's overproofed. If it's starting to bubble, it's definitely proofed. And 4 hours is pretty good. It isn't really too long, so we're not looking at a 10 to 11 hour proof, which would be severely overproofed. So you definitely could try shortening it. Just try your next loaf at 3.5 hours and see what happens there. It could also be that you're taking a lot longer to stretch and fold. So there's what we call bulk fermentation. Bulk fermentation starts as soon as you mix starter with anything. It starts to ferment whatever's happening. So if you're letting your dough rest an hour and then stretching and folding, and then every 30 minutes you're stretching and folding, and you're doing 5 sets of stretch and folds, well, now you've covered like over 3 hours, right? So when you start bulk proofing, you have to acknowledge that the dough has already started proofing, right? So our stretching and folding process takes 2 hours total, right? If you're auto leasing, if you're waiting extra time to add your starter later, your salt later, all of these things extend the time that the dough is starting to ferment. Bulk proofing starts after stretching and folding and is before pre-shaping and shaping. So TS chili, I would say maybe just shorten it down to 3.5 and see if that fixes it. And if that doesn't fix it, then the other things that we talked about, make sure that your oven is nice and hot. Make sure that you're pre-shaping the dough and building lots of tension in it, letting it rest, and then shaping it and putting really good tension in it, right? We want that dough to have lots of air trapped inside. Make sure that your score line is about 1/4 to 1/2 an inch deep on sort of a almost parallel to the counter angle to encourage that good spring. And if you've got any questions, send me a message after. I'm really happy if you want to send me like specific details about what you're doing or upload a video and tell me the details, then we can definitely troubleshoot more. Oh, Carlene. Hi, Carlene. Hi, Sarah. This is Carlene. I advertised at Facebook and I sold all 8 of my sourdough bread. And I had a lady that has been up here in Montana for 2 years and she hadn't had good sourdough bread in a long time and she loved my sourdough bread. Yay! I love hearing this. So Carlene's been following for quite some time. She comes on every week. I get these followers who I just start to get so attached to, and I love seeing them. And Carlene started out as a beginner, knew nothing, learned, watched all the videos, practiced, troubleshooted, and now she's selling her bread. Carlene, on the sourdough Amazon sourdough storefront. If you just go down on the Facebook page, there you'll see there's links to it. I actually just made a cottage baker's Amazon tools list. So if you're going to start making lots of sourdough, I found like big containers that you can mix like a quadruple batch in and mix it all up in there and then do your stretch and folds right in the container and then bulk proof right in that same container. The only thing is once you start mixing big batches like that with 4, like say 8 loaves all in one batch, you're probably going to have to switch to coil folding rather than stretching and folding. The dough gets too big to really stretch and fold, so it's easier to reach under the dough and lift it straight up and fold it on top of itself. But if you need some help with finding bread bags and big containers to store your flour in and huge scoops and all that stuff, if you're going to build a real business, send me a message and I'll get you a link for that. Same thing on Amazon. It's at Sourdough for Beginners. It's all on the Facebook page. You can find it all. We have lots of questions in the queue. This is so awesome. So let's Jane say. Jane says, "Hope my dough is always too wet. I've tried 5 times without success. I can't seem to shape it. It's way too sticky. I used all-purpose and whole wheat. Is it overproofed? Proofed 4 hours?" So Jane, I think this question just got uploaded twice, or you hadn't seen it yet. But 4 hours is not super long. So we talked about it could be a few things. One, your hydration could be quite high. 2, it could be overproofed. Or 3, it could be that it's just the stickiness that it's supposed to be, and pre-shaping will help you. 4 hours is not an overly long time for bulk proofing, so it may be that it's not overproofed. Although I will say if you're using whole wheat flour does proof significantly faster than all-purpose. So I think you can try those things, and if you want, there's lots of videos on the YouTube, or send me a message and we'll get it troubleshooted and figured out for you. Let's see here. I recently saw a post online about freezing your sourdough starter of dehydrating it. Have you ever tried it? I have a really good starter now and was wondering. So you can freeze your sourdough starter. I've actually seen people put it in ice cube trays. So take your sourdough starter, put it into ice cube trays, and then once it's frozen, pop it out of the ice cube trays and just throw it into Ziploc bags. I think that it'll, as long as it's really well sealed in the freezer, theoretically it would stay stable basically forever. So I've seen people do it, and I've seen actually people say, like, I did it, I froze it, and then I thawed it and fed it again to reactivate it to make sure it was going to work. And lots of people say it works great. Dehydrating is an excellent insurance policy. On my YouTube channel, there is a dehydrating video that shows you how to do it. It's really easy. if you dehydrate some of your sourdough starter and then God forbid something happens to your sourdough starter, it gets mold or bugs or your jar breaks or something terrible happens, then you've always got this backup plan. And same thing with dehydrated, as long as it's in a really well sealed container and sort of a cool, dark place, it'll stay stable forever. Dehydrating is also a really great way to share with, you can mail it to your friends basically anywhere. I've shipped my mama starter to Australia, almost every state, all over Canada. One even went to Mexico. So there's a couple of good options for you there. Let's see what Hildy says. If I use the discard now to bake, will I get sour taste in my baked goods? I have about 6 days worth of discard. How long do I have to use it before baked good tastes tangy? That's a great question. Hildy is quite sensitive, does not want the sour taste. Hildy, what I do when I discard, which is not very often anymore, is I've got a jar in the fridge and I'll discard sort of on top of discard over several days. And I try to use it up within 2 weeks. So sort of the jar gets fuller and fuller. And usually what I end up doing is every 2 weeks I'll have like a bake-a-thon with the kids. My husband's two little ones come and stay with us every other weekend. And we make cookies and pancakes and we make brownies, and we've got cheesecake on our list, so we use them all up. For you, I would say you should probably use it up within a week to 10 days. What happens is the longer it sits in the fridge, the more unfed it is, the hungrier it becomes, the more it's moving down that sour flavor. So I did send you a bunch of discard recipes today. If anyone who's watching is interested in discard recipes, there's a discard recipe playlist on YouTube. I've got 2 discard recipe ebooks on Etsy and Shopify, and I have like a list of my go-to ones. So I'm happy to send those to you. Let's see here. Escalera 111. If I'm using a lower hydration 65% recipe, will my bread be more dense and have less rise? Really good question. Your bread will be more dense. It shouldn't have any less rise. It may rise slower than a higher hydration recipe, especially since I don't know how much starter you're using, but it should still rise the same amount, but the bread will be denser. The higher your hydration gets, the more sort of airy and bubbly and moist the inside of the bread is and crispy crust on the outside. So we recommend that beginners start with a lower hydration recipe and just practice until they've got the essential processes down, till they're comfortable and they're getting good loaves, and then start to increase that hydration a little bit to start to get a less dense bread. So that's a really great question.
This will actually be cool because Julian will make really, really nice loaves. Like we'll have to get him on as a co-host.
Yeah, so what's coming next? So I'm planning to be here every Monday at 7. I hope you'll all come visit me. I love it when people upload the videos. So if you haven't yet, give it a try. Show me what's happening. Julian and Rick and I have all been friends since high school. Julian has become an accomplished chef in his day. In his life, his food is amazing. He's done some star cams where in one sitting, he's taught us all how to make like the most amazing carbonara pasta, all kinds of good stuff. So there's no question that if Julian starts wading into sourdough, it's going to be fantastic. Julian and I actually I found this sourdough. I told Rick one time that I wanted to go to sourdough school, and he said, "There's no such thing as a sourdough school." And I said, "Yes, there is. There's one in this little town in Italy, and you go for a week and you stay in this little like sort of like bed and breakfast, and every day you get up with these accomplished French and Italian bread chefs and learn how to make these amazing breads." There's another one in South Korea called École de Pain. So Julian and I have messaged and talked and sort of dreamed about going off to somewhere in Europe and taking bread school together. So Julian, you definitely need to do it. Send me a message. I'll mail you some dehydrated starter. It'll make it go quicker for you. I've been getting blisters on my loaves. Is that good? Yeah, that's great. So what if your bread is a, a reasonable hydration and B, cooking properly, what you should have is a really crispy crust and a really soft interior. So when you take your bread, once you cut it in half, if you squish it, it should pop back. People call it the monster mash, right? So if you take your bread and you squish it and it's not popping back, then it's not quite perfect yet. It's probably still tastes great, right? But it's just a little denser than it needs to be. So when you start seeing blisters on the outside of your bread, that's a really great sign. It means it's flaky. I posted a loaf the other day and it was like I was so proud of it. It's like even me as someone so experienced, sometimes I just have not great loaves. But this one actually looked like a croissant. People were saying it looks like a croissant, and I was like, I know because it's so perfect. So yeah, that's a good thing, Carlene. Hey Manfred 725. Hey, been making sourdough donuts all day. What's the best way to store your baked goods? Oh my gosh, my husband is going to be like, how come he can have sourdough donuts and I can't? It's high on our list of something to try, but I haven't tried it yet. So couple things. I don't know how well donuts freeze. When I make bagels, I actually freeze them all immediately. And then what we do is take one bagel out of the fridge at a time. It thaws like in 10 seconds in the microwave and then we toast it. But I don't know if donuts are going to freeze very well. I would say if you were going to freeze the donuts, you should probably freeze them on a tray. I'll spread it, wait till they're frozen, then toss them into a bag. There is a there I have a link for there's a company called Nectar and Nest, and they have created the most amazing beeswax bread bags. On my Facebook page there's a recent reel, so if you go to the reels on my Facebook page, I think it's on YouTube and shorts too, there's this bread bag that they sent to me, and there's a link to it on Amazon. It's like I think it's about $30, but you get two and they're huge. Like you can easily fit two loaves of sourdough in one bread bag. They're lined with beeswax and then they're linen on the outside. So you put your baked goods into it, squeeze the air, and then roll it down and clip it closed. And I'm finding it's extending the life of my bread by a day or two. But that's an interesting one. How do we store donuts? If you are not in the sourdough group on Facebook, if you ask that question, you'll get like post a picture of your donuts, tag at sourdough for beginners so I see it, and ask that question. Hundreds of people will probably answer you and be like, I've tried all these different things and this is what works great. This is what works the best. I do really recommend those beeswax bags though, and especially since it's a group member and she sort of figured out how to have these things made perfectly and just got them launched on Amazon. They're quite good, and I've got links to those. That's an interesting question, how to store donuts. I'm going to think about that one a little more.
Hey, could we talk about scoring a little bit, and also when we leave the loaf in the oven for the first 10 minutes and then we take it out and we rescore? Maybe we could talk about that to help everybody with their spring in their ear.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay. You have three kinds of scores. Okay. The first kind is what we call the functional score, right? So we are putting our bread in the oven. It's full of air that we've trapped in during pre-shaping and shaping. It's meeting the high heat. This air that's inside the dough is building pressure, and then poof, your bread springs, right? Presumably. If it's overproof, there's too many bubbles and it falls instead, right? If it's underproof, there's not enough bubbles, so it springs a little bit, but it's quite dense, right? What we're doing with proofing, when we're doubling our dough, it's not getting any more volume, right? Like it's not growing in size, it's building bubbles inside of it, right? So what a functional score does is allows that gas and air to escape during the spring phase, right? So you always need a functional score. You basically are going to set your functional score all the way across the bread at about half an inch deep. If you want a nice turned up ear on your bread, then you want to do it perpendicular to your counter. If you don't really want an ear, then do straight up and down scores about half an inch deep, one or however many you want, right? The second type of score that you have is a decorative score, right? So that's where you're just putting the pretty pictures on. You're making the Instagram loaf. If your dough is perfectly proofed, you can basically leave your dough sitting on the counter for as long as you need and get these beautiful designs on there, and they're going to pop and show. If your dough is not properly proofed, then it's not going to hold these scores. Your dough is going to fall. That's an entirely different thing. The third kind of score is what's called a hot score. And there's a few reasons to use a hot score. There's some people who don't score their bread at all. They put their dough in the oven for 6 to 7 minutes, and then they take it out and do their functional score at that point. But a really good reason for using a functional score is if you think that your dough is slightly overproofed and you're not sure it's going to spring, what you can do is 10 minutes in. So get your dough into the oven, right? Do your functional score. 10 minutes in, pull your dough out and take a look at it. If your score that you cut looks like an L, if it's open like this, right, then it's fine. It's going to spring, right? But if at 10 minutes in, if that score that you cut is like flat and smooth and fused together, your bread's not going to spring. So take your razor and cut it again, and then get that lid back on and bake it some more. So I think that's what Rick wanted me to talk about. Leg 5006. Hi, I have only been making bread for a week now, and we love it. What's the best way to store your sourdough bread once it's cooled to keep it fresh? Thank you. So a few things. If my auntie is single, so what she does is she gets the loaf home, she slices it, and then she freezes it and just takes one slice out at a time that she needs it. So that's a really good way for people who, are going to take more than 3-4 days to proof it. I love these beeswax lined bread bags, right? I've got links to it on Facebook and I believe on YouTube. They're also in my storefront on Amazon, the Sourdough for Beginners storefront. The beeswax lining sort of encourages the moisture to stay in the bread, and the linen, it keeps it nice and fresh. So that's one option, but they're not cheap. They're like $30 for 2 of them. So if you don't really want to spend the money, another great thing is what I was doing before I got those beeswax bread bags was going to the grocery store and getting the bags that you put vegetables in and like pulling them off the roll. People would look at me like I was crazy, but I take 10 or 12 of them and put my bread in that. I find that sourdough stays fresh on the counter for 3 days, 4 maximum. After that, it molds. So, because it doesn't have any preservatives in it, right? So I hope that one of those ways might work for you. And by the way, if any of you have any questions after this or want me to actually send you the specific link that we talked about, go to sourdoughforbeginners.com and hit the contact page and type it out to me. Hey, Sarah, I saw you on StarCam. I want to know about your ebook, or I want a link to those bread bags, or can you send me the tutorials on pre-shaping and bulk proofing and whatever it is. It'll come straight to my email, and then I can respond to you and send it right to you directly. So sourdoughforbeginners.com and the contact page will get you straight to me. T.S. Chili. What's your favorite spices to add to the bread for more flavor? Okay, that's a great question. So these are called inclusions. And I'll tell you what my favorite is, and I'll also tell you how I do it and why. My favorite is jalapeno cheddar or garlic and cheddar. I just think that they're great. I've made these a couple of times. My husband actually had me the other day just put garlic. What was it? Garlic, oregano, and onion powder, I think. And I just put it on top. And it's nice. It smelled so good. Inclusions. We recommend that you don't put your inclusions in until final shaping. And the reason why is because it will and can and will affect your hydration if you add it earlier. So if you're adding wet things like jalapenos or garlic or blueberries or lemon juice, or whatever it may be. And by the way, my ultimate discard recipe book has a whole section on mix-ins and also has like a whole bunch of ideas on the different types of mix-ins and inclusions you can do. That ebook has like 15 recipes in it, and there's a whole section on mix-ins. If you add wet things to your dough during stretching and folding, it's going to increase your hydration, right? Increasing your hydration can cause your dough to not do super well. If you add dry ingredients early on, it's going to suck up some of your water, reduce your hydration, possibly causing more dense bread, right? So until you're really confident in being able to adjust your recipe, so hey, I'm going to include my jalapenos during the stretch and fold phase because I want it to really infuse into the bread. So as a result, I'm going to slightly reduce my water, or I'm going to add my cinnamon and sugar to this bread during the stretch and fold phase because I want it to really be immersed all the way through the dough. Or maybe you're even going to add it during the mixing phase. Then you're probably going to reduce your flour a little bit, right? So the easiest way to add inclusions as you go is to do it during final shaping. On my YouTube channel, in the shorts section, you'll have to scroll a little while, but you'll see a picture of a garlic and cheese loaf, and it actually shows how I add those inclusions during the final shaping phase. And of course, there's also a whole tutorial on it in my ultimate discard recipe ebook, which is on the website as well as on Etsy. So we're coming up on 8 o'clock here, about 13 minutes left, and I've got 6 questions left in the queue. So I'm going to just answer the next question, and then after I've answered that, I'm going to stop question submission. So if you have any more questions that you want to ask, get them uploaded right now. And then what I'll do is go through and finish all of these questions, and we'll check YouTube and see if YouTube had any questions. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I actually can see the comments if I go check them. I've kind of forgotten to check them until now, but we'll see if there's anything on there, if we can get those answered, and then we'll wrap up for the night. My daughter will be done rugby at 8 o'clock, and we're all going to go get some dinner. So let's check the next question. Castlebeck. Carol, thank you. That's the other thing. I can only see your handles. So if you want to tell me your name, it makes it easier for me. Hi, it's Carol again. I need a good pancake recipe using discard. I tried one today, but they tasted good. We're very thin. Carol, I have the best pancake recipe. It's so sweet and decadent. It's got sugar and maple syrup right in the discard pancake recipe. Sourdoughforbeginners.com, contact. Send me an email. Tell me you want this pancake recipe. I will send it to you. Or go to at Sourdough for Beginners on YouTube, hit playlist, and go to the discard recipe playlist, and the pancakes are in there. Oh my gosh, they're so good. You're going to love them. So I'm just going to stop question submission now. If I can. There we go. Okay. Rick.
Yeah, I'm out here freezing with the kid at rugby, and people are getting donuts. This is bloody ridiculous. I need some donuts.
I told you, whoever uploaded that question about donuts, he's always like, how is it that I'm like married to the sourdough mama and I never get any discard stuff? But we're really busy. So we're at rugby right now. Our daughter is 1 year away from university, and she's exceptionally athletic. And this time of year is crazy. Hockey just ended. She's on the rugby team at school as well as the local city rugby team. So she's playing two rugby teams right now. And her city rugby team will go through the entire summer. And she also races dirt bikes in the 250 ladies class. So we're always very busy. So as I do like making discard recipes, but it usually only ends up happening on holidays when things calm down. So sorry, Rick. K Manfred 725. I had an order for the donuts, so there won't be any left to freeze. Laugh out loud. Should they keep in like a paper type bag? I think they will. I mean, even donuts that aren't sourdough donuts, like even the ones that you buy like at your local donut shop, they only seem to last like a day or two. And then remember you used to be able to buy day old donuts? They don't sell those anymore. It used to be 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago when I was a kid, you could go in and buy day old donuts in a bag. And so they were baked yesterday. They were starting to get a little bit dried out. I definitely think a paper type bag would be great. You might even be able to wrap them in wax paper. So put them on wax paper, wrap the wax paper around them, tape it, and then slide it into like a Ziploc bag, and that might trap some of the moisture in. I think the thing with donuts is they're so light and airy, they lose their moisture. So whatever you can do to trap the moisture in might really help them. And it's your fault. My husband's very upset with me that you have donuts, and we don't. I can see that you're in the States. If you were closer, and now that I know you're taking orders, I could just order them from you so that I don't have to try and make them. Oh, that's so great. Let's see. So Russell Lauren, how does it work if you store the starter in the fridge? Great question. So if you made your starter from scratch, once it starts doubling consistently every feed, we recommend that you keep feeding it daily on the counter for a week or 2 weeks just to continue building strength, right? Starters do get better with time. Older starters are stronger, they're more stable. So definitely build up some strength. But once your starter is established, or if you started with a dehydrated starter, as soon as that dehydrated starter activates, it's considered an active an established starter. So you don't really have to worry about building strength. After that, you can store in the fridge. So I always say there's kind of a few different ways to manage your starter, and you should determine which one to do based on how you bake. If you're a once a week baker, right, then keep your starter in the fridge. Pull it out the night before or 4 to 12 hours before you're going to bake, right? Feed it what you need. So say, for example, if you need 200 grams of starters, feed it 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. Leave it sitting there until it doubles. Mix it in, and then don't refeed it. Just stick it in the fridge, right? And it can sit in the fridge for 7 days or 4 to 12 hours before you bake, whichever comes first. It can actually sit in the fridge for way longer, but we do recommend feeding it once a week when it lives in the fridge, just to keep it stable and active and everything else. But you could leave it longer if you needed to. So that's option one for your once a week baker, right? For your daily baker, someone who's baking 5 to 7 times per week, we say just keep it on the counter. So do your mix. As soon as you're done mixing your dough, refeed your starter, leave it sitting on the counter. Tomorrow when you go to bake, it'll be ready for you. You can use your starter at or after peak, right? So if your starter is peaked, even if it's started to fall, as long as it's been fed within 24 hours, you can use it. The longer past peak, the more sour flavor you're going to get. And then last, there's the people like me who bake 3 to 4 times per week. And what I do is what we call a peak fridge. So I mix my bread, and then I refeed my starter. I leave my starter sitting on the counter until it peaks. Once it peaks, I stick it in the fridge. As long as I bake within 2 to 3 days, I can actually pull it straight out of the fridge. It'll still be sort of close to at peak or maybe slightly fallen. The fridge slows down the fermentation process enough that it kind of pauses it in time. So I pull it straight out of the fridge and I don't feed it again. I just use it straight in my bread. So, a few different ways to manage it. Escalera 111. Thank you very much for your help and support. The recipe I'm using is 500 grams of flour, 350 grams of water, 125 grams of starter, and 10 grams of salt. What do you consider high hydration? High hydration is 72% and higher. So you're at kind of a reasonable, I would say 70% is about medium hydration, not high. So that's a great recipe. 125 grams of starter is a little bit high. But not too high. But it could be like when you've got that much starter, it is the more starter you have, the faster your dough is going to bulk proof. So if you're having issues with sticky dough or you're saying it doesn't make sense that it's overproofing because I'm only going 4 hours, one thing you could do, I would keep your flour, your water, and your salt all the same. Those are pretty standard, but maybe reduce that starter down to 100 grams, maybe. It's up to you, but that recipe that you have is really standard and really perfect. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it at all. There we go. Okay, so we made it. Oh yeah, so we made it all the way to the end of the questions in the StarCam queue. Let's just go check our YouTube content. Okay, so we have a few questions here. So the neat thing about StarCam is that I can actually simultaneously broadcast live to YouTube as well. So if you were watching this and you had a question come in and you wanted to rewatch this, this will stay permanently on YouTube. So you can actually go back and rewatch it anytime. You can sort of find your question or find something that might have been said. It should be there. I can also see the YouTube contents. So Carol Philbeck just became a member. Yay! I'm really excited to hear that. And Crystal Gilbert said, "Hey, nice sunshine." That was awesome. It was like shining right in my face, but it's a long winter here in Canada, so we always get really excited when the sun starts coming out. And Rick says, "Best show on baking, period." Well, I mean, if Julian starts doing shows, then I might just be out of business here, but who knows? We'll see. So thank you all for being here. I'm here every Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Really glad that you all came. Really appreciate you all. Like I said, if you've got any questions, sourdoughforbeginners.com contact page. Ask me. I'm happy to answer. And hopefully we'll see you all again next week. Talk to you soon. Bye now.